Captain America throws his mighty shield. All those who chose to oppose his shield must yield.
Hi guys, I'm George Dillon. Welcome back to my film journal. Happy 4th of July. Today I'm doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be talking about comic books today, which I've only done one time with my Silver Surfer video, which was a pretty extensive video that I would advise you to check out if you're into comic books like I am. As you can see from behind me on the shelf, it's something that's inspired me a lot, especially when I was a little kid. I don't have time to read them much anymore. But recently, in honor of the Independence Day holiday, I decided to reread Captain America by Jack Kirby, the Madbomb series. This is a Marvel Masterwork hardcover that collects issues 192 through 200. It was an 8-issue miniseries story arc within the pages of Captain America that began in January and culminated with the Bicentennial, the country's 200th anniversary in 1976. So the Bicentennial was a huge deal in the 1970s. It sounds like they must have had a killer time for the 200th anniversary. It was all over media. And even in films, if you watch Rocky, the original movie, the Rocky fights Apollo for the Bicentennial bout. It's a big deal. It's a celebration for the Bicentennial in Philadelphia, right? And if you watch the King Kong remake, the Dino De Laurentiis one with Jeff Bridges, they even say the Carl Denham stand-in character, which I believe is played by Charles Grodin, says, we got to bring Kong back for the festivities of the Bicentennial. That was quite the buzzword. It was a great tie-in. Like if you wanted to like ratchet up some excitement, you'd cite the Bicentennial. Even Marvel got in on the game with some products like their Bicentennial calendar, which featured Hulk and Spider-Man and Captain America in colonial garb marching into battle. So it was a big thing. And for a guy like Jack Kirby writing Captain America, it was like the perfect opportunity to do something really big and awesome. And I think what draws me to Madbomb is not so much, that it's a terrific story, that it's, really realistic or well written, not necessarily, but it has a lot to say about Jack Kirby, a Jewish immigrant, a veteran of World War II, someone who was probably definitely like a New Dealer. It says a lot about what he thought about America, what he thought about the country. And it's unabashedly patriotic. It's incredibly unironic. It's totally sincere, almost like adolescently so, but in a very, very charming way, which was a big switch up from when you had the writers on Captain America through Watergate, in 1973. It was hinted at that there was a villain. I can't remember what he was called, but it was insinuated that this lead villain was actually Richard Nixon when he was revealed, even though we don't see his face. And then obviously after Watergate, they don't specify explicitly why Captain America is so jaundiced and why he's feeling so down and out about the country and the state of the nation. But he becomes nomad. He renounces Captain America and becomes nomad. So you had a lot of, sort of leftish, hippie authors at the Marvel bullpen in the 70s who were trying to use the Captain America comic to convey a sort of political message. So it's actually nothing new. I know there's a lot of YouTube channels that spend a lot of time talking about the politicization of comic books, but it's not totally brand new. So Jack Kirby, he took over the Captain America book, I believe, in 1975, or this run might have been the start of his work on the comic book. But he was brought back. After he had left Marvel in the late 60s after a falling out with Stan Lee, which I cover a little bit in my Silver Surfer video, he went to DC and he drew Jimmy Olsen, and he drew the New Gods, amongst other things. And he left there as well after about 6 years, feeling like he wasn't being appreciated. And from what it sounds like, he wasn't. I know I've heard stories about how the editorial staff at DC was dissatisfied with his particular style, and how his style continued to get, he continued to lean more and more into his own style as he got older. And any sort of pretension of trying to be realistic in the way that he drew these characters totally went out the door. So I know there's a lot of stories about them bringing in artists to redraw Superman's face. They didn't think he had done a good enough job, or they thought he looked too cartoony and not like the house style, not how he should be. And obviously, having people hijack your pages and redraw your art is something that probably mounted on Kirby and made him want to leave and go back to Marvel, which he did for about another 5 years until the early 80s he left again. But when he came back to Marvel, he had his pick of the litter. They said, choose what books you want to write. And everyone thought maybe he would go back to the Fantastic Four, which, was he and Lee's crowning achievement, the book that kicked off the Marvel Universe. But that's not what he decided to do. Instead, he picked the Eternals, which is basically like a continuation of the New Gods, which obviously was now owned by DC, but it was a Kirby creation. So he goes, well, I still want to write the New Gods, so I'll just call it the Eternals now that I've moved over here to DC, and I'll do it that way. And then I also want to draw Black Panther, which is an interesting choice, a character that he'd created in the pages of Fantastic Four, issue 66, I believe. And then I want to do Captain America, which seemed like the most logical choice. The book, I think, had been faltering and kind of was losing its, they didn't really have much direction. Captain America, I don't know if his book was that popular, kind of waning in the mid-70s. But obviously Jack Kirby with Joe Simon created Captain America in the 40s as a propaganda tool, as a way to bolster, to ride on the popularity of pro-American sentiment during World War II. And he came back to Captain America, and he didn't write and he didn't draw necessarily like boilerplate Captain America adventure stories where Captain America, oh, there's a villain of the week, I got to fight him. No, Jack Kirby tended to tell really long form continuing stories that share a lot of different tropes and a lot of things that we can identify as they go through. Like he wrote, I think 30 or 40 issues of Captain America until maybe like 1978. I think he quit. But Madbomb is a really fantastic and interesting read. So what's the story? So the story is Captain America has to fight a villain named William Tari, who is a disaffected aristocratic Brit who's still pissed off about the fact that America kicked the British out in the 18th century. And he swears revenge, and he wants to swear revenge on whoever the ancestor of Stephen Rogers is. We get confirmation here that Captain America is indeed like a wasp for real. Like his family came over on the Mayflower because his ancestor fought in the Revolutionary War and defeated Tari's great-great-grandfather in a duel, and now he needs to get revenge, right? So he's got a sort of personal vendetta against Captain America. And also, William Tari, he wants to destroy democracy. Obviously, it's no good. We need to get the monarchy back in there. We need to have the elite run the show. And Kirby was never subtle. I mean, the villainous group that Tari, and by the way, he dresses like, he's in like a costume drama with the powdered wig and all. He's not subtle. The group is called the Elite. They're the group that's going to overthrow America. And why I think this is so interesting is because there's a lot of like prescience in this book, because the way that the villain decides to destroy America, which is something that Kirby identified as a potential weakness of the country even like back 40 years ago, he creates mad bombs. And these mad bombs, they don't explode. No, they radiate waves, radio waves that get into your brain. And if you're in a certain proximity of it, it makes you go insane and it makes you go nuts. So what do you do? Well, number one, if you're infected with this ray, you riot, and then you immediately turn on and hate your fellow American. And this happens in the first issue. Captain America and Falcon are just hanging out at Sam Wilson's apartment with his girlfriend, just hanging out, talking, being, buddy. And then all of a sudden they hate each other. And they hate each other in a way like they don't just like, they're not just like ravenously like, barbarians, like slobbering at the mouth, like just fighting. No, they feel personal animus against each other. They find the thing in each other that like is their most like their biggest weakness, and they pounce on it. Captain America threatens, Falcon, I'm going to destroy you. And they both get racial towards each other. Falcon says something like, I'm going to take you down, Whitey. And obviously they come to their senses. It's interesting, this Madbomb thing that sends out radio waves, forces everyone to go nuts and turn on each other along racial lines or class lines. And they beat it. And it's revealed later on. Caps goes, well, what's going on? And they get whisked away to a secret government facility and are met with a cameo by Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger is a guy. My first introduction to Henry Kissinger is reading Christopher Hitchens' book on him. And it's just like a laundry list of all his war crimes in Cambodia and whatnot. Though I know he's still like a vaunted figure and everybody seeks his advice or whatever, and he's still alive. He's like 103 or whatnot. But like, he's obviously a controversial figure. But in the eyes of Kirby, a guy who's just he just loves the idea of America. He's not cynical about it. He likes the government. Henry Kissinger's in the government. Hey, he's an American too. He must be a good guy. I'm going to give him a cameo in my Captain America story, and it's going to be a completely favorable one. I mean, it is interesting. I know that Henry Kissinger was a guy who, like, even though he was like I think he was, what was he? Nixon's, like, he worked in the Nixon administration, but apparently he had that quality that so many right wingers, like, they want to try to straddle that line. How can I be the friendly right winger that all the lefties like? Because Kissinger was actually a guy who, like, he got invited to the premiere of The Godfather. He hung out with celebrities. Like, they thought he was awesome. Like, the fact that he was, like, right winger, worked for Nixon, was just kind of like an interesting curio about him. Like, oh yeah, but hey, Henry Kissinger, he's cool. I mean, I know that he's mentioned a lot in The Kid Stays in the Picture, the book by Robert Evans, as like one of his buddies that he would call up all the time and ask for advice. So anyway, Henry Kissinger, pop culture icon, is in the comic, and he lays out the entire thing to Cap and Falcon, and he says, hey, here's what's going on. There are these mad bombs, and Kirby, goes to great lengths to illustrate and explain, like, the workings of these, which is kind of interesting because, like, he didn't really necessarily need to do that, but he spells it out, and he identifies the gradations of extremity in the different mad bombs. There's Peanut, which is the small one, which can affect a small village, and then there's I can't remember the name of the second one, and then there's Big Boy, and these are obviously villainous tools, but it's interesting that, like, in their conception, the thing that they reminded me most of were the 2 atomic bombs that we dropped on Japan, Fat Man and Little Boy, right? Sort of like destructive devices that have cutesy nicknames. So anyway, Captain America and Falcon, they stage they sneak into the Elite's lair, and they have to go through a series of trials. And something that pops up in a lot of Kirby's other stuff, if you read on into like issue 210, there's a whole storyline in which Cap and Falcon invade Arnim Zola's castle, and I think these are really interesting and fun just because they're from the wealth of bizarre creativity that's in them, especially when it concerns like mutated human beings. That was something that Kirby was really interested when it came to these Captain America stories. And it's maybe an interesting dichotomy between Captain America, the perfect, like, Anglo, like, specimen hero, and then all of his villains are like grotesque, because I know that he's always done outlandish and creative creatures, but I've never seen, like, back to back so many, like, horrible malady ridden, like, mutated, like, freaks that are just slaves to some evil being. Like this character Doughboy, that's Arnim Zola's, like, big fat glob creature that can also turn into a spaceship when he flies around in him. But yeah, they encounter a bunch of deformed mutants because, as evil people do, the Elite are like mutating people to make a creepy army. But they also have a litany of soldiers in goofy stock henchmen costumes. And the comic book series is heavily indebted to a lot of, like, things happening in pop culture at the time. For instance, like Falcon and Captain America, when they're taken prisoner, they're subjected to something called the Kill Derby, which is basically like rollerball. It's like a shameless ripoff where they're forced to, like, roll around on skateboards in a circle and fight other people to the death. Obviously, they succeed because they're great heroes, and they eventually make their way up the chain through the secret lair to fight the Elite, all while they're trying to communicate with the military, which is staged outside, which is working to find a way to break in. And it's led by, like, sort of like the MacArthur type corncob pipe chewing general. And at the end, in the culminating fight scene, it reminded me a lot of, like, those James Bond movies that I always really like when James Bond does this, like in Thunderball or Spy Who Loved Me, when you're reminded that James Bond is actually a commander, and all of a sudden he's got like 50 like soldiers following him around and invading the giant evil villain lair base. And everyone's fighting and blowing up and flying around. And it's kind of like that towards the end, with Falcon leading the charge and doing most of the really difficult battle work, while Captain America engages in a mano-a-mano with William Tari. Yeah, the whole Tari subplot, I think, is what struck me the most about it. It's really interesting, and it's something I was kind of like, It's an interesting analog to what we have going on right now. Someone manipulating the American people through waves of, like, information dissemination that's forcing them to turn on each other. And they even say as much in the comic. Like, the villain's plan is like, we'll make them turn on each other, and that's how we'll take over. We'll pit American against American. And there's even a really interesting line in the comic, and I'll try to find the page here, but where everyone that's a follower of Tari engages in like a 15 minutes of hate, kind of a la 1984, where they see a man on the screen projected in front of them, and this man is supposedly their leader. And Captain America has a really interesting piece of dialogue in this portion. The leader is a disembodied head that is a composite image, so it's not a real person. It's like an idealized face of what like a leader would be, and he's in front of the new American flag, which is basically like the one we have now, but instead of the 50 stars, it's instead a hangman's noose, which is kind of interesting because it like reframes the identity of the country not as like 50 little countries that came together under one roof. Rather, it's like a symbol of like revenge and brutality and punishment. And the evil villain refers to everybody who wants freedom as a freedom freak. And if you want freedom, if you desire freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of thought, you are a dissident, and you therefore must be destroyed because you are against the communal system as a whole. And Cap says, if this leader doesn't exist, then the elite runs the whole show. They offer these followers an image while they wield the power. If this leader doesn't exist, then the elite runs the whole show. They offer these followers an image while they wield the power. I thought that was cool. I think that's something that I think all sides of the political spectrum believe in. It's like, who's really in charge, who really wields the power, whether it be like the Bilderberg group or like the Rothschilds or the lizard people or whatever you want to say. But I think that's an idea that has always been on the periphery, but increasingly more and more as things start to get like a little more haywire in our society, people are kind of looking around like, who do we blame here? Who's actually in charge? Who do we get mad at? And I think at that time, unlike the elite, who they had the idea of like giving you this concrete image of a villain, like we don't really have that. So what we have is, my neighbors are responsible for all my problems. If it wasn't for them not voting right, we'd have heaven on earth. It'd be a utopia. But anyway, Captain America does defeat the villains, and it's a great little story. Even though there's like a little like romantic subplot in there that doesn't make much sense, and almost feels like it almost feels like Kirby saw a love story and was just like, I want to have that in my comic. But he's like woefully. He's woefully outgunned when it comes to writing sentimental dialogue or anything that's supposed to be realistic or romantic. The guy, everything is on the nose. Everything is like straightforward, totally without irony, without shame. Everything is very straightforward. And that's actually has a lot of charm to it. His artwork too. And I think as he went on and got older as an artist, his art did tend to it got like crazy. Like Kirby would have like sort of shorthand ways of like drawing stuff fast, which he had to do in the 60s when he was drawing 8 comics a month for Lee, where people would look a little more blocky sometimes, or women, especially their faces would be a little wide. Things would kind of be sketchy and quick. When he draws splash pages in the comic book, they're always incredible. You could tell he had a vision for a moment in the comic, and he put his heart and soul into those 2 pages, and then, okay, how do I get from the splash page to splash page? Also, though, I don't know how much I think maybe, as I said, sketchiness before has to do with the recoloring, the color, the brand new color restoration in the new edition. I know that they do that a lot when they do these Marvel Masterworks, and sometimes it does the original art a disservice because it lacks a little bit of that grit that you get in the original comics. I think sometimes the inking suffers, and the boldness of the inks suffer when they go through the process of the restoration. And I think too, you lose a certain amount of subtlety in the colorization as well, because the brown page in the old comic books gives the book, I think, a lot of texture. And when it's sort of flattened out and exposed and fixed and colorized as it is in these new editions, I think maybe it suffers a little bit without its context as a comic book, right? But no, I think Kirby's art's spectacular in it. It's a really fun story. No cynics allowed. And also collected in the edition is a little story that was in Captain America's annual. So the annuals were a thing they don't really do anymore, but it used to be that once a year, in addition to the 12 issues a month, a series would have there would be an 84, 64 page extra large $1.50 comic book. You could get the annual edition of the story. And in this, it's a long story of Captain America traveling through America throughout the decades, and in different decades and different eras. He fights in the Revolutionary War. He helps an escaped slave. And there's a great little moment there, you know, one like really sentimental, where the slave says, "I've never heard a white man call me friend." Uh, and Captain America said something to the effect of like, "Not your people, my friend, our people." You know, we're all right. It's just like it's a good feeling. You know, it feels good, and it's I think today what we would call like, you know, boomer sentimentality or boomer patriotism or something. But Kirby was one of the greatest generation, you know. But I can see a lot of the hippies in the bullpen not maybe appreciating his like simple, optimistic view of American history. Obviously, they were probably upset. I think it's charming, and I think it's reinvigorating and a lot of fun and really sweet, especially this little page at the end where Captain America is surrounded by young children of all different walks of life and races, and he says, "That's America, a place of stubborn confidence, where both young and old can hope and dream and wade through disappointment, despair, and the crunch of events, with the chance of making a life meaningful." Kirby, if you've seen like some of his artwork, I think it's in the, you know, at the Kirby Museum, he drew his neighborhood in the 1920s where he grew up. And it's just like this densely packed, crazy, like turn of the century place that would be unthinkable to us today. Chickens running around in the street, kind of like Godfather Part 2, right? And this is a guy who, though I think a lot of people look back at him as a tragic figure, someone that was screwed out of a lot of money that he was owed for creating characters that are now multi-billion-dollar properties. He didn't get much from it. This was a guy who felt like a winner in life. You know, he felt like a winner. He got to do what he wanted. He loved the country he lived in. He loved his family. He loved his characters he created, and he loved making amazing, spectacular, like really, you know, out there wacky art. And he has a style that you can see and instantly know who it is who did it. And I think the sad part about this is, like I said before, a lot of the other people at Marvel didn't necessarily share his appreciation of what he was, they didn't like what he was doing. And I know that Kirby, if you read the letters to the editor page in some of these older books, you have people complaining, saying Kirby's lost his edge, or he's getting too weird, or this is cheesy. You know, this comic feels like it's, you know, for little kids. Because this, like the late 70s, about the time when you had the original Marvel kids in the 60s. Like they're growing up and they wanted more, you know, they wanted the comics to grow with them, right? Something that I think we see today with a lot of fandom. And they were upset that Kirby was making something that they saw as childish. And I hope this isn't true, but I'd even heard rumors that there were a lot of people in the editorial staff who were like trying to get Kirby like fired. Like they brought him back thinking this is going to be a great creative boom, bring back Kirby the King, the guy who started the Marvel Universe, and everything that he was making they didn't like. So I've heard that the editors seeded the letters page with fake letters that were just written by staff saying the book sucked, trying to get Kirby to fall in line and get back on track and to draw realistically like John Buscema or John Romita or something. I'm glad he didn't. This is a great little story. I had a lot of fun reading it. I loved Captain America comics when I was a kid. I can't explain why I liked him so much. I saw him on a beach towel when I was in 3rd grade, and I didn't know who he was. You know, he didn't have a cartoon or anything. And I remember finding Captain America comics at the comic book store when I went there, and just like really falling in love with this guy with chainmail, blue armor, and you know, a big star on his shield, a really unique weapon. And I thought Steve Rogers, Captain America, was a really cool character. And I liked him and the Falcons relationship. You know, I didn't know what that kind of relationship is, just two guys hanging out, fighting crime. But it made sense to me as a kid. And it's a really dynamic story. I'm going to do more videos like this. I hope maybe if this gets positive feedback, where I just kind of go stream of conscious on something that I've been reading recently without having to, like, you know, write a script, go into insane detail, do a lot of research, just kind of go off about it. So I hope you like it. And I hope you guys have I hope you guys have a really fun 4th of July weekend. Shoot off some fireworks, blow some shit up, drink some beers, celebrate the country. And if you choose to, check out Captain America Madbomb. It's a great little bit of reading to get you in the holiday spirit. So thanks so much, guys. I've got a 35-minute review of Brian DePalma's Blowout. It's an exhaustive, detailed video retrospective with, I think, some good, interesting insights. So rewatch that movie in preparation for the drop of that video, which should be very soon. Thanks so much. Have a great 4th.